Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, Steve Hall, and today I'm interviewing the one and only Hypertrophy King, Brad Schoenfeld. He's back on the show for the fifth time, and we dig into many questions, including some recent systematic reviews, meta-analyses, and also the Max Muscle Plan 2.0. Why does he include a strength phase? Why does he have a metabolite phase? What potential avenues could they have for potentiating hypertrophy? And we dig into much more. And as a reminder, guys, we are very active over on Instagram. I myself am Revive Stronger. We have Pascal_Floor. We also have our other coaches, Jess, Harry, and Ryan over there, and our team page, Team Revive Stronger. So if you want to go and check out Team Revive Stronger, go search that on Instagram. You'll be able to find all the coaches there and the amazing content that we're producing. Give us a follow. It'd be much appreciated. But for now, let's get into the show. Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I have Brad Schoenfeld back on the show. This is Brad's fifth time on the podcast, and actually it looks like we pretty much arrange these almost every year. You'd think I'd done it on purpose, like I'd planned this out, but there's always another reason to bring Brad on because he always brings out amazing information, and I'm honored to actually be able to have had this relationship for so long and bring you on for so long, but also have this kind of annual meet up almost.
It's always a pleasure, Steve.
And there was kind of the ignition, I guess, for bringing you on was the release of your new book. I have the old one here, so I have the Max Muscle Plan, which actually it's actually quite old now, comparative to now the second edition, which has come out, which both of them great books, and we'll definitely dig into that. But I always like to, especially for guests who are also lifters themselves, people like to know kind of how is the things on your end in terms of lifting. Brad, what are you up to?
I mean, what I'm doing as far as my program?
Yeah.
So, I'm at a point where I just don't have the time to commit that I used to. So I'm just involved in so many things. I'm more on a maintenance type of program. I generally get in 4 days a week. I do an upper-lower split, so 2 days upper, 2 days lower. Moderate volume, usually probably somewhere around 10 to 12 sets per muscle per week for the most part. But I have limited time commitments. I'll do roughly an hour, 50 minutes to an hour per session, 4 days a week. There's just not much. You can't maximize, at least the way that I would want if I was in a real building mode. I'd be structuring my routine somewhat differently. But the good news is, and for people out there, is that maintenance you can maintain on much less, on a much more basic type of routine. And I mean, I still love training, so I could probably get by on somewhat less actually for maintenance. But I just like being in the gym, and from a health perspective, there are benefits too. So I also try to get a step count. I'm a big step count guy, and I try to get generally 12,000 steps a day.
Nice. Yeah, I always look at the studies where they quote kind of numbers for maintenance volume, and I'm like, it's great that it's that low, but I'm like, I can't even imagine going as low as that for an extended period of time. How's that? Actually, is it kind of hard to get your steps in at the moment? Is it cold in New York this time of year?
It's January now. It's we're a Fahrenheit, but in Celsius, it's around 0 degrees. And yeah, I mean, it's when you say, is it hard? I just do it. I have a dog, English Bulldog. So it's my connection with England. And I mean, I just do it. I dress warmly and I get out there. So
it's an advertisement for Nike if I've ever heard one. And actually, speaking of the new year, are you, and I'm just interested in your perspective on this, because I think there's different camps somewhat in terms of like new year, new goals. Do you set goals at the start of the year? Is that something you like to do, or do you have a different perspective to like meeting goals and outcomes?
Yeah, never worry about the time of years to set. To me, I set a goal when I want to do something, whether it's January 1st, May 1st, September 1st. To me, I never saw the logical rationale in waiting until the first of the year and say, all right, now it's a new year, I'm going to somehow set new goals. I mean, to me, life is about continually reassessing where you're at, and I'm always looking for my next conquest and what I want to do in life. So my goal at this point, my overall arching goal, is to make an impact on society in the limited sphere that I can in terms of exercise, and promoting an understanding of evidence-based practice, and how to optimize fitness within that construct. So I'm always reassessing, where I can go and what I can do.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, well, you're doing it right now, hopefully, with coming on the podcast when we reach a number of people. And obviously through this, the new book actually, and coming back to Max Muscle Plan 2.0, and kind of obviously reaching lots and lots of people. There's like a program in there for people to get on board with, but also all the explanations within there too. If it's easy for you, what are the main differences if people own the original copy? What are the main differences between the original and this new one?
Yeah, so they're somewhat nuanced. I mean, there's like 50% new content in the book.
Yeah,
But I mean, my opinions have changed. Some of them modestly, and some of them quite drastically. Like, I'll give you, for instance, the chapter on nutrient timing. It's almost a 180 from what I had originally. My belief back in 2010, when I wrote the first edition, based upon my knowledge at the time, was that nutrient timing was very important to maximizing gains. And based upon a lot of evidence and studies that we've carried out, research that our lab has carried out, I just don't feel that way anymore. So the whole section was completely revised. Some are somewhat more subtle, such as, I mean, first of all, rationales as to why to do a metabolic phase, where before I was under the belief that you weren't able to build muscle in that phase. I don't believe that. There's actually quite compelling evidence, and evidence that's been carried out through our lab, amongst others, that clearly show that you can gain muscle across a wide spectrum of loading ranges. But there's still a rationale for other reasons why that should be included. Rest intervals. I mean, there's just so many different areas that, like I said, some of them are modest differences in what I used to believe, and some of them are quite substantial. I've added new chapters. So I added a chapter on warming up, which I had neglected to do. So there was a lot of feedback that I'd gotten from the previous book. Why didn't you do this? And based on that, I kept writing everything down. I'd start seeing these questions and comments come in, and I was like, you know what, you're right. I should have done that. I had used an RPE scale, which turned out to be very confusing for a lot of people, and to gauging failure, proximity to failure. So, and by the way, the repetitions in reserve really was not in play at that point. There was a couple of papers that talked about repetitions to failure, which kind of was the genesis of it, but it was very preliminary at that point, and that's been a very well-validated concept. And I have switched now from an RPE to an RIR-based rationale for my opinion has changed in terms of what is the best way to go about gauging your proximity to failure. So, like I said, it's about 50% new content, and of course I completely revised the understanding of the mechanistic aspects. So I mean, we've just learned so much. We still have a lot further to go, as I point out in the book, but just so much of what I had thought at the time, what my understanding at the time, and our understanding, when I talk about my understanding, was an evidence-based interpretation from what we knew from the literature. And in fairness too, I'm a much better scientist now than I was then. I mean, I hadn't even done my PhD at that point. Correct. I was just starting my PhD. So, I mean, when you carry out a lot of research, it makes you a much better, not only researcher, but someone who understands research better.
Yeah. No, fantastic. And I mean, like I said, it's been a long time. When was the first book released, actually? What was the date of that?
I think the release was 2011. I know I finished it in
Yeah.
2010.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been a decade. So a lot has changed. And as people that follow Brad, they'll know that as science evolves, you evolve your opinion. And I know back, I think it was around that time. I even have, it's actually in my like family home. I have a textbook about nutrient timing, and it was the textbook about nutrient timing that was like
Right.
the big thing. But there was nowhere, that's where the research was pointing. And then a load of new stuff came in and was like, oh, damn it. Like we can't hang our hat on that thing. So it's great to see that. So like you've just updated all your point of views and perspectives. And a lot of that is thanks to the research you've also been doing.
Correct. And just to your point with the nutrient timing, it was the Portman and Ivy and Portman book
Yes.
called Nutrient Timing, and it was considered the Bible. Certainly, I had gotten the book, but much of it was based on acute research. There was not a lot um, of longitudinal research, long-term research. When I say long-term, over the course of many weeks, 2 months, 3 months. So we had acute research, which looks at muscle protein synthesis, for example. And even that, in going back and looking at some of that, I think that the interpretations were overly skewed. I actually did a point counterpoint with Dr. Ivy, which was published about 5 or 6 years ago in Strength and Conditioning Journal, and we still apparently have different opinions on the topic. And that's why, look, researchers can have different opinions, but I think that in my humble opinion, the research has borne out what I believe in. And I always say, to me, the sign of a true scientist and a true evidence-based practitioner is someone who changes their opinions when the time is right, when emerging research becomes, to me, what I feel is compelling, or what that person, you should never be hardened. I consider it a badge of courage to change my opinion, rather than, some people will feel embarrassed by saying, "Well, I got it wrong." No, that was my opinion at the time, and I'm open to changing it based upon new evidence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the only final question I have you on for this one is if someone's thinking, should I get the Max Muscle Plan 2.0 or should I get your textbook, The Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy? Is there an easy way you have to go in between the two of what you think someone should pick up?
So Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy is a textbook. So it is for people that want to really get into the nitty gritty of the science. There's a practical aspect to that book, certainly, but it's not intended to be a training manual. It's intended to be, I'm going to teach you everything there is to know about what is involved in developing muscle. How you get there, I give certain examples in the book, but it's not intended to be a training manual. Max Muscle Plan, on the other hand, is a consumer-oriented book. Conversely, while I do also cover the scientific aspect, it's put into more layman's terms, or I tried to. There's still a science-based aspect to it, but I do my best to make it more conversational, where the tone, even just the tones of the two books, Max Muscle Plan is more conversational. And I provide a template for training. It is not, this is how, I don't give, and certainly there's no such thing as the 10 commandments of a training manual where everyone just follows the exact same program. But I teach people, my goal in that book, in Max Muscle Plan 2.0, is to teach people how to construct a routine. And I give a template for it, and I discuss how there's individual factors that need to be taken into account. And I try to delve into how you can adjust the template to your own individual needs and abilities. So I would say that the textbook, Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy, generally you need to have at least an undergrad degree, or either that, or you need to really be a student of the literature. Let's say, I do know some people who, I don't know if you studied at the uni, but certainly if not, someone like you. Have you studied at the uni?
I have, but not related to the field.
Okay, so yeah, so you'd be an example of someone who at least knows enough where you can use that book. So, but people like you it's not often that there are people like you. So most people have not done the self-study. to be able to understand the physiology, biomechanics, et cetera, to really, I think, sink their teeth into the nitty gritty of that book.
Yeah, no, I think that you described it really well when I was thinking about the two. And like the textbook is a textbook. It's quite a, like, if you want like an easy read, it's not an easy read, but
Right.
the information in there is fantastic. And it's something I use very much as like a reference point. If I'm ever thinking I need, I don't know, a study to support my idea where I'm like, I know this to be true, but let's go back to the textbook. Let's find that kind of reference point so I can have that. Whereas, like you said, the Max Muscle Plan, by no means is it like a fiction book that you just like enjoy reading, but you do enjoy reading it, but for a different reason. And it kind of really sells you on everything that's going on within muscle hypertrophy. And I think they work well kind of synergistically together. But if someone's thinking, which one should I get first? I'm not sure. I would go Max Muscle Plan. Then maybe if you want to go next level, the textbook is
again,
there.
it's a bit, if you're a researcher or someone who is in school and wants to really delve into the scientific aspects, I think Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy would be more appropriate. For the average consumer, I definitely would go with Max Muscle Plan as the better option.
And before I dig into any questions relating to what's in the book, there's actually something I want to see if you're able to answer this question, because I appreciate that you might not even be able to yet, but you literally, it might have been today, posted talking about a systematic review of the literature regarding volume and what we should be doing necessarily with that to preserve muscle. I don't know if you can talk to that, because a lot of it's actually quite a controversial topic within the field of bodybuilding. Should we increase our volume? Should we decrease it? Should we maintain it? So I don't know if you can speak to that systematic review that you've been working on.
No, you might be thinking of someone else. I'm not working. There's just not enough literature to do a systematic review on that topic. You're talking about, no. I think what you had talked about, we have a systematic review of how much volume during a caloric deficit.
Yeah.
That's not for maintenance. Well, okay, I see what you're saying, to maintain
Preserving,
muscle.
yeah.
Yeah, because I was looking at it when you said that. There's systematic reviews, just I'm not in a deficit, but my goal is I'm not looking to cut at this point. I'm just looking to maintain the muscle I have and eat healthfully. So yeah, that's a little different, but yeah, I can certainly speak to our systematic review. The general philosophy is to when you're in a caloric deficit, so when you're in a cutting phase, that you should cut volume along with that. And the theory is that you just don't have the energy to support higher volumes, and that you're going to become overtrained. There's several lines of reasoning along this route. The current literature, now I'll contextualize this by saying that the literature, we still need more research. It's not like there's a lot of conclusive evidence at this point, but if anything, certainly there does not seem to be, with the literature that we have, doesn't seem to be a negative effect to maintaining volume. And there does seem to be a benefit, seems to be more prevalent in women than men. I don't have a logical rationale why that might be the case. So it could just be an artifact of the current literature. When I say an artifact, just something that is there, but that really is a kind of an illusion based upon the fact that we don't have enough literature to properly subanalyze. And that as we get more literature, that would even out somehow. But it does not. So the one thing that I could say pretty much, the literature does, I think, pretty convincingly shows there doesn't seem to be negative effects. Now, you could say that if there's not a positive effect, then why bother, which is fair. But there might be a benefit to it. Again, we need better evidence. And to me, when you start saying, you know what, there's a potential benefit and no negative, if I'm a bodybuilder, probably I'm choosing to maintain my volume, not cut volume at that point.
Yeah, I think it is. There's a few people I know in the field who have always said, when you're in a deficit, like lower your volume. Like you said, you haven't got the energy reserves to be able to perform as well, and you'll still maintain muscle that way, and you won't kind of, I don't know, overtrain or do too much for your recovery capacity. So, but like a lot of your research has alluded to, volume being a prime driver of hypertrophy, kind of pulling back that card seems like it wouldn't make sense, at least, that that would be a wise decision unless you are forced to. But when you're forced to, you might be losing muscle in that scenario anyway.
But to the other point, though, so we do know that you're able, when I say you, the proverbial you, everyone, people are able to maintain muscle with lowering volume when they're not in a deficit.
Yes.
So then there's the interactive factor. So you have the interactive factor when you start to reduce your calories, your energy intake. Do you need that? Possibly, do you need higher volumes to maintain that same level of maintenance? And there does seem to be somewhat of an interaction, or at least there's a possibility there is an interaction there.
Hey, Pascal here. I just wanted to take the moment to talk about our membership site. Inside, you'll find a thriving forum, an extensive exercise library, courses, presentations, and research reviews. All I need you to do is hit the link in the description below and sign up.
Really interesting. So yeah, I'm excited for that to be released, and we can dig into that. And I guess we want even more research as ever to get more conclusive ideas surrounding it.
Yeah, I'll tell you this too. So with collaborating with the same group, we have an original study. We're currently analyzing the data where we carried out an actual original study where we looked at a moderate versus higher volume during a deficit. So I don't have anything to share with you at this point. Like I said, it's still in the analysis phase, but we should have something within a couple months on that.
Oh, wow. And are these, just out of interest, are they fairly well-trained individuals you have in that study?
These were resistance trained subjects. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, because I imagine that conflates a lot of things because of everyone else. So something else you actually recently posted was a meta-analysis that concluded full range of motion training is superior to partial range of motion training for promoting muscular development. But you kind of had some additional thoughts to that, including kind of where potentially partials might be beneficial. I don't know if you could just speak a little bit more to that in terms of what your general recommendations are in terms of range of motion and potentially where partials might be included.
Yeah. So as a general rule, full range of motion does show greater benefits than a partial range of motion. However, the literature that we have, the vast majority of it, looks at, let's say, in a squat. So it's mostly lower body work, first of all. And it's in the quadriceps, and it's looking at a half squat. So the first, 0 to, let's say 0, meaning you're at no knee angle. You're basically at full extension in the knee angle, to 50%, 70%, versus going 0 degree knee angle to 120 degree. So going a much greater knee angle. So below parallel, let's say full range of motion. And that does show greater quadriceps. However, there does seem to be benefits. And again, when I say there's somewhat limited, but it's emerging. So we're getting more and more research now that does show that in the stretched position, really what it seems to be is that having a greater range of motion, the real benefit is going lower. It's not the top portion of the movement, it's the stretch. It's loading a muscle at what's called a long muscle length. I collaborated on a study probably a year ago now that it was really interesting. We did leg extension. So we did full 90 degrees to something like 90 degrees to 50 degrees, then 50 degrees to 0 degrees, or 100 degrees to 50 degrees, 50 degrees to 0 degrees, or full range of motion. And then it was a really cool study that was carried out by my colleagues in Brazil that I collaborated on with them. And we also had a group that did half of the training from 100 degrees to 50 degrees and the other half from 50 to 0. Well, what did we find? We found that full range of motion was better than partial range of motion from 50 to 0 degrees, from basically from full extension to 50 degrees of knee flexion. But we actually found that the 100 degrees to 50 degrees got superior results to the full range of motion. Now, a couple of caveats with this. They're able to use heavier loads with the partial range of motion. So we equated it so they got the same number of repetitions within, the repetition range within the set. And it basically training at the long muscle length with the heavier load, because they're able to, they're not excursioning, the excursion is not going as far. So basically they're doing the work within the full range is less. Interestingly, you got greater results. So it does seem to be that the stretch position, there's something specific to that. Now, I'll also give a caveat, and I'm working with a colleague on a review paper on this, and this is very speculative at this point, but it also might be that different muscles have different benefits so certain muscles might be more have a greater ability to hypertrophy in a shorter range, whereas other muscles maybe have a greater ability to hypertrophy at a longer muscle length. So there's certain factors we speculate on some. Again, this is something we're putting into practice, but we speculate on some of the mechanistic aspects as to why this might be. There's a nuclear flattening theory where the nucleus actually flattens in more of a stretched position. Titan actually becomes more stretched in the stretch, but there are other sensors and stimuli that might be more specific to the fully contracted position. So again, these are things that just are not well detailed. So I do think, as a good general rule, you can't go wrong with a full range of motion for most movements. But it doesn't mean, number one, training does not have to be a this or that, either or. You can do some, let's say, focus on full range, and you can add in some partial range movements certain times. There's certainly benefits from a strength standpoint for getting through sticking points, et cetera, where that might help hypertrophic gains. So you could do partial range training because there is a specificity of range to the gains that you make. And let's say you have usually it's around the sticking point here. You can be training through a sticking point at a partial range with heavier loads to be able to get past that sticking point, which again, if you're doing full range movements, can help with hypertrophy in full range exercises. So again, I think that we often and it's misguided. I think all too often people tend to think in binary terms, fitness people, where is it this or is it that? And it's an easy way. People always want to give me an answer to this. They don't want to hear it's a nuanced topic. And when you start giving them choices, then it can be overwhelming to people. But to me, it should be empowering to know that there's many ways to go about it, and that if you understand the underlying premises, you can make gains. And that's, again, one of my goals is to teach people about not thinking, I'm not going to give you the fish to feed you for a day. I'm going to teach you to fish so you can get fed for life.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely interesting. And I think bodybuilders have used this sort of idea of like training at longer muscle lengths and partials and things like for a long time. And I guess it's because they feel like, don't know, like it's something you feel almost for some movements where you're like, I just feel like I've got more to give here. I'm just going to kind of rep out a few in the partial bit because that's where I'm stronger. And yeah, I can't get it short now, but that's where I'm really weak. And I feel like I can milk out a little bit more stimulus here for not excess fatigue. And I think probably newbies can get into real trouble when they try and get into that. But and where your kind of understanding of like in general full range of motion is probably ideal. In terms of, actually, it makes me think of, I've recently moved and I've moved to a new gym, and they have quite a few pieces of Prime kit. I don't know if you're aware of that brand, where essentially what it allows you to do is they either have various pins on the machine where you can kind of load it more, so it's harder in the lengthened range or the mid range or the shortened range.
So there was a equipment in the US. We had one called Strive, I think,
Strive, yes.
that did the same thing. I really like that machine. Actually, my old gym had that, and my new one doesn't. So kind of missed that unit. But yeah, and again, that's where you can say, all right, I'm going to do, let's say, 2 sets in this range. It's not like you had to you pick a range and then stay in that, when it's not even a range, but pick that selection of where it's going to be harder and where it's not, and stay in that. Look, there's also variable resistance training. So there are certain machines that try to match the strength curve to the human, match the force output to the human strength curve throughout the range of motion with the machine. There's very limited evidence on that topic at this point. And spoiler alert, our group is going to be carrying out a study looking at that soon, at least from an EMG standpoint, and look at muscle activation. So these are all really prime areas of research. And as much as we like to think that we have the answers to all these questions, we're really still in the infancy of research. It's a very exciting time to be a researcher in the field.
Yeah, that's really cool. And actually, I know in the book, and this is something you've spoken about previously, is I feel like you're one of the people that does emphasize that variation is an important factor for hypertrophy. I think I just get the sense that other people don't seem to think that it's as big a deal, that maybe there's perfect exercises that if you just stick to that one and progress it, you're going to see all the gains or what have you. But in the book, you talked about kind of making exercises that you have in your program almost synergistic in nature, and I guess kind of training muscle, different muscle lengths. So it might be like a spider curl into like a incline seated curl, which challenged the muscle at different lengths. I think this is like the art of programming. I'd love to hear a little bit about that and kind of how people might be able to build that into their program, or at least kind of have an understanding of why variation can be helpful.
Yeah, so muscles have varied attachments. And they have the human body is set up in it's just a beautiful system, as are other animals too, other species. But the human body is so, it's really incredible how it's set up to carry out everyday activities in 3-dimensional space. And it's kind of silly to think that just one exercise is going to hypertrophy a muscle in an optimal manner, all aspects of it, when it has these diverse attachments that are designed to work differently based upon your positioning. And also, there's been quite a good amount of research now that shows that muscles do not necessarily span, most muscles don't span from origin to insertion. So they terminate what's called intrafascicularly within the muscle. They're often innervated by different nerve branches, meaning that they can be targeted by different movement patterns in different planes and in different joint angles. So really we need to, if the goal is optimal hypertrophy, let's say from a bodybuilding standpoint, and you want to have symmetrical development of all your muscles, I don't think it's even arguable that you need to have a diverse array of exercises in your routine that are challenging the muscles at different angles and different planes of movement, and probably in using different modalities such as cables versus free weights, because they're again going to, to a somewhat different extent, create force in different areas. Now, I think certainly you can overdo that. I'm not talking about this like the muscle confusion concept, and yeah, so I think there's a happy medium there. But I don't think, or I do think that for the average person, yeah, doing your basic movements like squats, you'll see you do squats and chest press. For the average person, it's probably not going to make a whole lot of difference. Although I still think it would be remiss for anyone who wants to have a decent physique to not at least include some diversity in their exercise. But the more, the greater your ambitions for, let's say, a bodybuilding type physique, or really for symmetry across the total musculature of the body, the more important it is to have an understanding of applied anatomy. And then, like you said, in your programming, look to combine exercises to work muscles in different fashions.
Yeah, I think it's like you said there, like that basic understanding of anatomy and the functions of muscles, and being aware that you probably want to train all the functions that a muscle can perform. So if you, I don't know, people used to think that the hamstrings really hypertrophied from a squat. It's like, yeah, the squat just covers my entire lower body. It's like, probably really not.
Not only that is not even arguable. Like I know, and there still is a belief to that, but I mean, it's very well documented in the literature that if you're just doing squats, your hamstrings are going to be underdeveloped.
And I guess, yeah, leading into some more questions around the book, actually, or one of the phases that you have in there is a strength phase. You talked about kind of the metabolite kind of phase there. And to quote you, you said, getting stronger ultimately fosters better muscle growth. I'd love to hear about kind of what the rationale is behind the strength specific phase.
Yeah. So if you're stronger, let's say you're going to target 8 to 12 RM in a hypertrophy training program, which, by the way, as I mentioned earlier, that's binary thinking. It's not that has to be done in that fashion, because you can achieve hypertrophy across a wide spectrum of loading ranges. And with that said, it's harder in the lower repetition zones, because you need to then make up for it with more volume, so more sets, and that starts to beat on you. It's generally not an efficient way. But with that said, getting stronger, you're able then to handle more weight at a given submaximal RM. So let's say you're stronger and you were doing, let's say your bench press was, I know you're probably a 400-pound bench presser for 10 reps, right? Somewhere in that range.
God, I haven't bench pressed in a long time. 400 pounds, that'd be crazy though.
So let's say, in all seriousness, let's say you're repping out 250 pounds for 10 reps, 200 pounds for 10 reps. Okay, so let's say you're repping 200 pounds for 10 reps. And let's say you're able to get that up to 225 pounds for 10 reps. Conceivably, your volume load is going to be higher, and conceivably there is a benefit to higher volume loads at a given number of sets. So, and I will say too that evidence is somewhat lacking. There is some evidence, but it's not like we have a great amount of evidence. But assuming that is the case, and I think just from a logical rationale, we can assume that it's beneficial to be able to increase the amount of load that you're being able to use in that submaximal loading zone, and that will lead to greater gains. So having a base of strength logically does transfer to greater hypertrophy. I do talk, though, I think it's important to say that a lot of this is hypothetical. It's supported by some theory, but there is no best way to train. There's many ways, as they say, many roads lead to Rome. Many roads lead to gains. And I think it's important to say that, and I do hopefully convey this in the book, that I try to give insights into what the literature shows, how we can draw evidence-based conclusions based on my own personal expertise. And again, I've had a lot of experience in working with very high-level bodybuilders over the years and physique athletes. But there are certainly other ways to go about it. And I think that's an important point to mention.
Yeah, very well said. I think it's periodization as a whole. There's evidence suggesting it may be not even necessary for hypertrophy. And I think most people like yourself who are researchers in the field, also practitioners and coaches, don't agree with that and think periodization is quite important. But a lot of you guys have different approaches to it as well. So like you said, there's many roads to Rome, so long as your rationale kind of makes logical sense.
Yeah, and by the way, there's very little evidence on periodization. As a matter of fact, there's the hypertrophy periodization research is almost nil. It's at least in what I would consider good hypertrophy research on periodization strategies. They're generally short term. So there's just basically we're left with the logical rationale for it and an anecdotal experience. So yeah, can I say unequivocally that a periodized routine is better? No. I do think from my experience and that of others, certainly, there is a good reason to think there is a benefit to it. But like they say, we still need research.
Absolutely. And then in the book, you actually talk about metabolite training and cell swelling and how it is contested whether or not it directly leads to hypertrophy or not. But you have other reasons within the book to why it might be beneficial to include it now and then. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So at the very least, doing a metabolic phase, meaning that you're doing higher repetitions, because the term high is somewhat ambiguous, but let's say 15 to 25 reps with shorter rest intervals, even in a superset type to adapt from an endurance standpoint. It improves your muscle buffering capacity. So again, one of the things we know in a, let's say a moderate 8 to 12, 8 to 15 RM range, you're going to start getting a heavy buildup of lactic acid. And the acid part, the hydrogen ions, cause what is we know is to be the burn, and that will interfere with the contractile elements. And often, generally the reason that people are not able to continue in a set in moderate rep range is due to the interference through the metabolite. If you can buffer the metabolites, if you can buffer the hydrogen ions, you're able to get more repetitions within that given rep range, and thus again have a conceivably get greater hypertrophy. So these are conceptual theories, but I have experience. One of the things I will say is that the template of the program is something that I've used for years in high-level physique athletes, and it's worked quite well. So we then start to look, well, what's the rationale? And I, in developing it, have modified it over the years, but I think it holds up pretty well.
Hi guys, Steve here. Just wanted to take a moment of your time to remind you of our online coaching service. At Revive Stronger, we pride ourselves on providing personalized service that will take your physique and knowledge to the next level. If you're interested, check the description and sign up. Yeah, for people who maybe will pick up the book, you'll see that from where you're talking here, you start with that strength phase where you're getting the muscle stronger, and it's almost like you're now almost sort of getting the muscle fitter, for lack of a better term in that sense. And then those two, I guess, potentiate the next phase, which is like your general hypertrophy phase.
Correct.
Do you have any reasons to believe if someone was to try and combine all three at once? Have you ever tried that sort of makeup?
Well, that's your classic undulating program. And yeah, I actually wrote another book that called Strong and Sculpted, where I discuss that. Yeah, they're all, so an undulating or an undulating approach is certainly viable. One of the issues is that if your goal is, let's say, purely from a hypertrophy standpoint, and particularly as like a bodybuilder where you want to peak at a given time, it's hard to drive the volume necessary when you're combining some of the other elements. So to me, it just is more intuitive to do it in a sequential format. So modeling it more linearly as opposed to doing it in an undulating aspect, but it's certainly viable. You could do daily undulating periodization, weekly undulating periodization, and you can use hybrid approaches to that. We have, let's say, every fourth session a strength day or something. It just gets harder to, because generally strength is achieved by continually pushing heavy loads, over time. When you're doing it, over, let's say, once every 10 days or something, it's just harder to get those neural adaptations, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, the skill, like coming back and trying to do it, and it's like, oh, I've already kind of forgotten how to do that in a sense.
Right.
I definitely see that. And actually, I think I've seen it said that if you're going for the higher reps, maybe 15 plus, that you have to maybe train to failure, otherwise they don't count as reps towards hypertrophy. Is that true, or can you still leave reps in reserve?
Yeah, there's no evidence that you have to train to failure. I mean, certainly you need to train with a high level of effort. You need to train with, if you want to make gains, you need to train with a high level of effort in your moderate reps as well. The proximity to failure has not been defined as to how close you need to train to failure in the higher reps, but certainly you need to come quite close. If you're leaving, 4 or 5 reps in the tank in a 25 rep set, it's not, you're going to be suboptimal in terms of your development. At least that's what the literature tends to show. And I collaborated on a paper on that as well that seemed to show suboptimal results when a lot of reps were left in the tank.
Brilliant. One of the things you also mentioned in the book, and this is why the book's helpful, because you talk about how you can modify it for yourself, is you talked about kind of why exercise order can actually be important and how it can influence the results that someone might get. I'd love to hear how someone might want to design the exercise order, or at least have some awareness of why that's important.
Yeah, so exercise order is another topic that hasn't been studied very well. We actually have, I recently collaborated on as you can tell, I collaborate on a lot of papers. I collaborated on a systematic review on that topic as well. The general consensus is that for the exercises that you, for the muscle groups that are lagging, that you most want to bring up, you should include them first in your routine. And this, if nothing else, is a good logical rationale, because if let's say you're doing an hour, your workout's an hour and a half, 90 minutes, or 75 minutes. When you start to get to the end of your workout, your energy level, if you're training hard, which you need to make good gains, the exercises that you're doing are going to tend to be somewhat compromised at that point, in terms of you're not going to have your all to put into them. So the general consensus is that you should look at what your lagging muscle groups are, train them first in a workout, and those that are less, that are stronger points, not necessarily stronger in terms of the ability to get strong, but that would be considered stronger points to your physique, should be put in last. And by the way, I'd also say the same thing with volume. You want to apportion more volume to muscles that, I discussed this in the book, apportion more volume to your weaker, your lagging muscle groups, and less to your stronger muscle groups.
Absolutely. And I know actually also in the book, you described how, like, the volume that's in the book, I guess, is what, from your experience and from the literature, seems to work well on average. But you described how people might want to manipulate it for themselves. What are some of the things, if someone's looking to do that, what might they want to look at?
Well, first of all, you need to look at your own recovery abilities. One thing that I've noticed as I've gotten older is my recovery is not what it was when I was 20. So you need to take into account your age, nutritional status, and other factors, and just inter-individual genetic differences in recovery abilities. And then, like I just mentioned, you also want to take a look at your what muscle groups you'd consider lagging, and what muscle groups you'd consider that you're happy with, if you will. And I use a concept called a volume budget, that there's a certain amount. We shouldn't be looking at volume like every muscle group you need to do, it's the same volume. It's kind of a silly thought, but there is a systemic focus on volume. So when you're doing exercises, let's say for squats, it's going to have an effect on your entire recovery abilities. So higher volume routines, you need to manage. Let's say if you're going to have a certain amount of volume, that should be for your entire. There should be a certain amount of volume for your entire body based upon, like I said, your recovery, individual recovery levels, and then how you apportion that should be based upon your perceived needs in terms of weak points, strong points. I'd also say it somewhat depends upon the exercise itself. So you can do more volume, let's say, in a lateral raise so I could do multiple sets of lateral raises or multiple exercises too, targeting, let's say, the mid delts. versus squats or bent rows. You're just going to get more beat up from the volume of doing a lot of volume with your squat, with your multi-joints, particularly your structural exercises. That structural exercise is an exercise that your back isn't really supported, so it involves stability. So things like bent rows, squats, deadlift would be another. And so again, looking at the type of exercise, your single joint movements tend to be more amenable to higher volumes as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they're like, oh, I want everything to grow and volume's the prime driver for growth. So I'm just going to add more to everything. It's like, oh, if you want to add more there, you, like you said, is the budget. You kind of have to remember, take it away from a strong point, maybe.
Correct. And then if everything needs to grow, then you can work in phases where you'd bring up one muscle group, let's say one or two. You usually, in my opinion, like 2 muscle groups would be kind of a max in a specialization phase, and then go to another 1 or 2 in the next phase.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think specialization for a more advanced bodybuilder is almost like a necessity at some point, where because they just have that budget that they're constrained because they need so much for certain areas to grow?
Yeah, I think it becomes more important as you get more experience, because generally, in the initial phases of training, some people just, they need everything. But as you start to, there's always going to be, I shouldn't say never, but rarely known someone whose growth is just completely symmetrical. It's almost always you're going to have certain muscles that respond better than others, certain lagging muscle groups. So I think it does become more important as one gains experience to be more cognizant of their development, their overall muscular development, and then target their weaknesses in specialization phases.
I think a term that gets thrown around, I don't think it's a scientific term, Brad, but you've probably heard of it, is junk volume. But it's essentially volume that you don't want to be getting into, because it's not promoting hypertrophy, and it may even be detrimental because it's excessive. Do you find that there's an easy way of someone, like, how do I identify if I'm doing junk volume?
Yeah, so I think that term is somewhat thrown around a little bit loosely. I hear people using that, and I'm not sure they understand the context. But to me, like you said, I think that it represents volume that's just not being beneficial. It's hard to, it can be hard to determine at that point, but you need to be cognizant of your physique, and taking measurements really would be the way. If you're not growing on the volume that you're doing, then it isn't necessarily that the volume, because there are other confounding factors. This is another thing that comes into play that people, I think, often neglect, is that there's a interaction effect between the variables. So when you do more volume, you can impact other, I'll even go the other way. When you're doing more, let's say you're doing shorter rest periods, you can impact the volume that you're doing. Or if you're doing heavier loads, again, it impacts volume. Doing more volume can impact the ability to use heavier loads. So there is this interaction effect. And to me, you have to be, I think, not only cognizant of your body, but you need to use a systematic measures to determine whether you're growing. I mean, even things like circumference. So look, I have a lab, so I'm able to, use precise tools that give us really good, like ultrasound. We have a $15,000 bioelectrical impedance analysis unit. And most people don't have access to like DEXA, but even that, those types of tools are gross measures, but I do think they're necessary. So using, let's say, circumference measurements. Yeah, is it as good as a DEXA unit or an ultrasound? No, but I think it can be used at least to gauge your progress. And I think it's important to have at least somewhat objective measures, because when people look in the mirror, they're seeing themselves every day, and it can be difficult to assess their progress. And even taking pictures, which I do think is beneficial, You need to make sure your lighting is exact, the pose is exact. Just turning a muscle, if you're going to flex, it isn't necessarily going to convey your true development.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, because that's something I need to pick back up is measurements. That's something I've been slack on for the last few years, is taking my own circumference measurements. I tend to rely on photos, but the reasons I don't like measurements, you could put just towards photos in the same way in terms of, I mean, there's human error with measurements, but
Correct.
Equally, there's many errors that come in with photos. And yeah, well, unfortunately, we don't have the lab. Do you think even in using the higher rep range on like an isolation based movement, maybe across multiple sets, do you think that's still not probably a useful, not necessarily not useful, but it still doesn't actually give you it's probably not an indicator that you can use strongly to correlate with muscle growth?
No, the correlation between strength and hypertrophy, there is one, but it's certainly not to the extent that I think you can draw inferences, particularly over short-term growth.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Brad, thank you so much. If people want to find out more about you, I would definitely recommend that they follow you over on social media. Where should they head? And then if they want to pick up the book, where is the best place? Or even any of your books?
As far as me, I just say Google me. You'll find all the info you want. But I'm on my primary outlets these days are Instagram and Twitter. I do some on Facebook, but it's the algorithms really suck on Facebook. So I've reduced my interactions there. And so just Google me. I have different names on each of the different social media platforms. And my book is on Amazon. You could just search Max Muscle. Just search my name and you'll get the panoply of books that I've written.
Fantastic. You're not on TikTok yet. You haven't stretched over there.
I know some of my friends are. That's a leap that I've not taken at this point.
I'm struggling with it too. I'm just getting to grips with Reels. So fantastic, Brad. I'll make sure that's all linked below so people can access that nice and easily. Thank you again for coming on, and thank you guys for listening.
My pleasure.
So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
The exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy, we're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge. And I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.